Let me ask you something. What happens when the talking stops? I'm not talking about a peaceful, comfortable silence. I'm talking about that kind of silence where both of you pull back, stop texting, stop calling, stop trying, no explanations, no closure, just distance. Now, most people think silence means the connection is dying. They panic, they assume it's over. But what if I told you that silence doesn't always mean the end? Sometimes silence is where the real truth shows up. Because when you both go silent, emotions don't disappear, they get louder. Thoughts don't fade, they multiply. And what happens next? That depends on who you are and how you handle it. Let's break this down. Silence has a way of stripping everything down to the truth. When the calls stop, when the messages disappear, when there's no good morning or what are you doing? You're left alone with your thoughts. And that's where things get real. Because during the noise of a relationship, constant talking, explaining, arguing, reassuring, you can hide from what you actually feel. You can distract yourself from the questions you don't want to answer. But silence doesn't give you that luxury. At first, it feels uncomfortable. Your mind starts racing. You replay conversations, overanalyze tone, wonder what changed. You ask yourself if you said too much or not enough. You start questioning your value, your actions, your place in his life. That discomfort isn't random. That's emotional reality rising to the surface. All those feelings you pushed aside just to keep things going are now standing right in front of you, demanding attention. And here's what most people don't realize. Silence doesn't create emotions, it reveals them. If you felt secure before, silence won't shake you as much. But if there were doubts, insecurities, or unanswered questions, silence magnifies them. It's like turning the volume all the way up on what was already there. You begin to see the connection for what it truly is, not what you hoped it would become. Think about those moments when you were talking every day. It's easy to confuse consistency with connection. Just because someone is present doesn't mean they're fully invested. Conversations can become a routine, almost automatic. You respond, he responds, and it keeps going without deeper meaning. Silence interrupts that pattern. It removes the routine and forces both of you to confront what's left when the habit disappears. You start noticing things you ignored before. The effort he put in or didn't. The way he communicated or avoided certain topics. The energy you were giving compared to what you were receiving. Silence becomes a mirror. It reflects not only his actions, but your own behavior. Were you overgiving just to maintain closeness? Were you ignoring red flags because you didn't want to lose him? These realizations don't come during constant interaction. They come when everything slows down. There's also a deeper psychological layer to this. Humans naturally seek closure and certainty. When communication is cut off, your brain tries to fill in the gaps. It creates scenarios, possibilities, even worst-case situations. That mental loop can feel overwhelming, but it also exposes what you truly fear. Fear of abandonment, fear of not being enough, fear of being replaced. These fears were always there, just hidden beneath the surface. At the same time, something else begins to happen. As the initial emotional rush settles, clarity starts to creep in. You begin to separate facts from assumptions. You realize that not everything you felt was based on reality. Some of it came from your own expectations. Some of it came from how much you wanted the relationship to work. Silence gives you space to evaluate without influence. No sweet words to soften the truth. No distractions to keep you attached to an idea. And let's talk about him for a second. He's going through his own version of this. Silence doesn't only affect one side. It forces him to sit with his choices, his level of interest, his intentions. If he was genuinely invested, he'll feel that absence too. If he wasn't, his silence becomes an answer without words. Either way, the truth starts revealing itself on both sides. There's a powerful shift that happens when you stop trying to control the situation. When you're no longer chasing a response or trying to fix the silence, you begin to see things differently. Your focus moves from why isn't he reaching out to what does this situation tell me about the connection? That shift changes everything. It takes you out of a reactive state and puts you in a position of awareness. A lot of women are taught to maintain connection at all costs, to keep communication alive, to smooth things over, to avoid distance. But constant effort can sometimes cover up imbalance. Silence removes that cover. It shows whether the connection can stand on its own or if it was being held together by one person's effort And here's the part that hits the hardest. You may realize that you were more emotionally invested than he was, or you may realize that you tolerated things you shouldn't have. Silence doesn't sugarcoat anything. It doesn't protect your feelings. It presents the raw truth, whether it's comforting or painful. But within that discomfort is growth, because once you see the truth clearly, you can't unsee it. You become more aware of your patterns, your standards, your emotional needs. You start understanding what you truly want instead of settling for what's available. And that awareness changes how you move going forward, how you communicate, how you choose who deserves your time and energy. Silence, as uncomfortable as it feels, becomes one of the most honest experiences in a relationship. It removes illusions, exposes emotions, and forces both people to confront what's real without any filters. When two people stop talking, it doesn't just create distance, it creates pressure. And pressure always reveals who can handle their emotions and who can't. Because silence isn't empty. It's filled with uncertainty, ego, fear, and unanswered questions. The person who has less control over those emotions will feel that pressure faster and stronger. At first, both of you might try to act like it doesn't matter. You tell yourself you're fine. You stay busy, distract yourself, pretend you don't care. But underneath that surface, your mind is working overtime. You check your phone more than usual. You wonder if he's thinking about you. You start creating little scenarios in your head about what he's doing, who he's with, and whether he's missing you. Now here's where emotional control comes into play. A person with strong emotional control can sit with that discomfort without reacting immediately. They don't rush to send a message just to relieve the tension. They don't let anxiety push them into breaking the silence just for reassurance. They understand that emotions come in waves, and they let those waves pass without letting them take over their actions. But the person with less emotional control, they struggle in that space. Silence feels unbearable to them. It triggers a need to fix things, to get clarity, to feel connected again. And that need can become overwhelming. It's not always about love. A lot of times it's about anxiety. It's about wanting to escape the discomfort of not knowing. You'll see it in the little things. Typing a message, deleting it, typing again. Opening his profile, checking if he's online. Looking at old conversations, trying to find hidden meanings. That emotional spiral starts building, and every minute of silence feels heavier than the last. Eventually, that pressure needs an outlet. And for the person who can't regulate their emotions, that outlet becomes action. They reach out. Sometimes it's casual, like nothing happened. Sometimes it's emotional, filled with questions or frustration. Sometimes it's indirect, posting things, hoping the other person notices. But one way or another, they break. And here's the important part. Breaking silence doesn't always mean strength. A lot of people think, at least I'm communicating, at least I'm trying. But if that action is coming from anxiety instead of clarity, it often leads to regret. Because you're not reaching out from a place of confidence. You're reaching out to escape a feeling. On the other side, the person with more emotional control is observing, not playing games, not manipulating, just watching how things unfold. They're paying attention to their own emotions and to the situation as a whole. They're asking themselves questions instead of reacting impulsively. What does this silence mean for me? What am I actually feeling? What do I want from this connection? That difference creates a shift in dynamic. The one who reacts emotionally gives up a level of control, not over the other person, but over themselves. And once you lose control over your own emotions, it shows. It shows in your words, your tone, your energy. People can feel when you're acting out of need instead of choice. It's not about who texts first. It's about why they text. Motivation matters more than action. Two people can do the exact same thing, but the intention behind it changes everything. One person reaches out because they genuinely want to reconnect. The other reaches out because they can't handle the silence anymore. Those are two completely different emotional positions. There's also ego involved in this. Silence can turn into a silent battle of who's going to break first. Pride steps in. You tell yourself you won't reach out because you don't want to look weak. But underneath that pride, emotions are still there. And if those emotions aren't managed properly, they'll find a way out. The person with less emotional control often confuses intensity with importance. The stronger the feeling, the more urgent it seems. But not every emotion requires immediate action. Just because you feel something strongly doesn't mean you need to act on it right away. That's where emotional maturity comes in. Being able to pause between feeling and reacting. And let's be real, nobody has perfect control all the time. Everyone feels the urge to reach out, to get answers, to break the silence. The difference is in how you handle that urge. Do you let it control you? Or do you observe it and decide what's actually best for you? When you sit in that silence without reacting, you start gaining a different kind of power. Not power over him, but power over yourself. You begin to understand your emotional patterns. You see what triggers you, what makes you anxious, what makes you feel out of control. And once you see that clearly, you can start changing it. Because at the end of the day, the person who breaks first isn't losing because they reached out. They're struggling because they couldn't sit with their own emotions long enough to understand them. And that's the real lesson hidden inside silence. The ability to stay grounded even when everything feels uncertain. When someone disappears from your daily life, even for a short time, something powerful starts happening in your mind. You begin to see things without constant influence. No good morning text shaping your mood. No late night conversations keeping you emotionally attached. No steady presence creating the illusion of closeness. What's left is just you and the truth of how that connection actually feels when it's not being actively maintained. At first, absence can make feelings stronger. You miss the routine, the attention, the familiarity. Your brain tends to highlight the good moments. You remember how he made you laugh, how he showed up at certain times, how things felt when everything was flowing. It almost feels like the connection is becoming more valuable just because it's no longer there in front of you. That's a natural psychological response. Humans tend to romanticize what they don't currently have access to, but as time passes, something shifts. That emotional intensity starts settling down and clarity begins to take its place. You're no longer reacting to the sudden gap. You're observing it. You start asking yourself deeper questions. Were you actually happy or were you just comfortable? Did he meet your needs or did you adjust your standards to keep things going? Did you feel secure or were you constantly trying to maintain his interest? Absence creates a space where you're no longer influenced by his presence. And without that influence, you begin to notice patterns you couldn't clearly see before. Maybe you realized that most of the effort was coming from you. Maybe you noticed that communication only happened when it was convenient for him. Maybe you start recognizing moments where you felt uncertain but chose to ignore it because things weren't bad enough to walk away. Clarity doesn't always come as a sudden realization. It builds slowly. One thought leads to another. One memory connects to a pattern. You start piecing things together in a way that feels more objective. It's no longer just about how you feel in the moment. It becomes about understanding the overall dynamic of the relationship. At the same time, you begin to reconnect with yourself. When you're constantly engaged with someone, it's easy to lose a bit of your own rhythm. Your time, your energy, your focus starts revolving around the interaction. Absence breaks that cycle. You get your space back. You start doing things without thinking about how it relates to him. You begin to feel your independence again, and that changes your perspective. What once felt like a strong emotional pull can start to feel different. Not necessarily weaker, but clearer. You can separate genuine connection from emotional attachment. There's a difference between missing someone because they truly added value to your life and missing them because you got used to their presence. Absence helps you identify which one it is. And here's something people don't like to admit. Clarity doesn't always lead to wanting that person back. Sometimes it leads to acceptance that the connection wasn't as strong, as healthy, or as balanced as you believed. That realization can be uncomfortable because it challenges the story you were telling yourself while you were in it. You may have believed that things just needed time, or better communication, or a little more effort. But with distance, you start seeing that some gaps weren't temporary. They were part of the foundation. And no matter how much you tried to adjust, those gaps remained. On the other side, absence can also confirm genuine feelings. If the connection was real, if there was mutual effort, respect, and emotional investment, that clarity can reinforce your desire to reconnect. But even then, it doesn't come from a place of need. It comes from understanding. You're not chasing the feeling anymore. You're recognizing the value. This is where many people get confused. They think missing someone automatically means they should go back or reach out. But missing someone is just an emotion. Clarity is what gives that emotion direction. Without clarity, actions are driven by impulse. With clarity, actions are intentional. Another important shift happens in how you view his behavior. During constant communication, it's easy to justify things. You explain away inconsistency. You accept half effort because it's still something. But absence removes the distractions. You're not looking at what he says anymore. You're looking at what he does when there's nothing pushing him to act. If he doesn't reach out, that becomes information. If he does, the timing and effort become information. You're no longer guessing as much because his actions are clearer in the silence than they were in the noise. And at the same time, your own behavior becomes clearer too. You see how much you were willing to give, how much you tolerated, how you responded to uncertainty. That awareness can be uncomfortable, but it's also where growth begins. Absence isn't about creating distance just to make someone miss you. It's about what that distance reveals to both people involved. It strips away distractions, habits, and emotional noise, leaving behind something much more honest. And that honesty doesn't always point back to the relationship. Sometimes it points back to yourself, your standards, your emotional patterns, and the kind of connection you truly want moving forward. When everything goes quiet between two people, effort can't hide anymore. Words disappear, promises fade into the background, and what's left is action, or the lack of it. Silence removes all the surface-level distractions that once made the connection feel alive. No more quick replies to keep things going. No more casual check-ins just to maintain a rhythm. It becomes very simple, very clear. Who is willing to step forward when there's nothing pushing them to do it? During constant communication, it's easy to assume both people are equally invested. You talk every day, you share moments, you build a routine that feels mutual. But routine can be misleading. Just because someone participates doesn't mean they're deeply committed. Sometimes people show up out of habit, convenience, or even boredom. That consistent interaction can create a false sense of security, making you believe the emotional depth is stronger than it actually is. Silence interrupts that illusion. It removes the routine completely. And when the routine is gone, only genuine intention remains. If someone truly values the connection, silence doesn't feel comfortable to them. It creates a pull, a desire to reconnect, to understand what's happening, to close that distance. That effort might not always be immediate, but it shows up in a meaningful way. Not forced, not half-hearted, but intentional. On the other hand, when someone isn't deeply invested, silence feels different to them. It doesn't create urgency. It doesn't push them to act. They adapt to the distance more easily, almost as if nothing important is missing. That lack of response isn't always loud or dramatic, but it speaks clearly. It reveals where the connection truly stood in their priorities. What makes this difficult is that people often look for hidden meanings instead of accepting what's right in front of them. You might tell yourself he's just busy, he's going through something, he needs space. And sometimes that's true, but consistent silence without effort becomes a pattern, not an exception. And patterns reveal more than excuses ever will. There's also a difference between someone who reaches out because they genuinely care and someone who reaches out only when it's convenient. Silence helps you see that difference. When the communication resumes, pay attention to the quality, not just the fact that it happened. Is he showing real interest, asking questions, trying to rebuild connection? Or is it casual, minimal, almost like nothing changed? Effort has depth when it's real. It doesn't just restart the conversation, it strengthens it. At the same time, your own investment becomes visible too. Silence forces you to reflect on how much you were giving, how much you were initiating, how much of the emotional weight you were carrying. Sometimes you realize that you were the one keeping everything alive. You were the one making sure the connection didn't fade. Without that effort, everything slows down or stops completely. That realization can feel heavy, but it also brings clarity. Investment isn't just about communication frequency. It's about intention, consistency, and emotional presence. Someone can talk to you every day and still not be truly invested. Another person might not communicate constantly, but shows up with genuine effort, respect, and care when it matters. Silence highlights these differences in a way that daily interaction often hides. There's also an emotional shift that happens when you stop chasing that effort. When you're no longer trying to keep the connection alive at all costs, you start observing instead of reacting. You notice who steps up without being asked. You notice who remains distant without explanation. That observation changes your perspective. It moves you out of a place of hoping and into a place of understanding. And understanding isn't always comfortable. You may see that the connection meant more to you than it did to him. You may realize that what you thought was mutual was actually one-sided. Those truths can be difficult to accept, especially when emotions are involved. But they're necessary. Because without seeing that clearly, it's easy to stay stuck in something that isn't truly fulfilling. Silence doesn't just test the connection. It exposes its foundation. Strong, genuine connections have something beneath the surface that doesn't disappear when communication pauses. There's mutual respect, emotional investment, and a natural desire to maintain that bond. Weaker connections rely heavily on constant interaction to feel alive. Once that interaction stops, there's nothing substantial holding it together. What's important here is not to confuse effort with chasing. Genuine effort comes from a place of willingness, not pressure. It's not about forcing someone to show up. It's about allowing them the space to choose whether they will or not. And that choice tells you everything you need to know about where you stand in their life. There's a certain kind of clarity that comes when you stop feeling, to silence yourself. When you resist the urge to always be the one reaching out, fixing things, or maintaining contact, you create space for the truth to reveal itself naturally. You're no longer influencing the situation. You're observing it as it is. And in that space, people show you exactly who they are. Not through words, not through promises, but through consistent behavior. Whether they lean in or stay distant, whether they make an effort or remain passive. Those actions define the reality of the connection far more than anything that was said before the silence began. So the next time everything goes quiet between you and him, don't rush to fill that space. Don't chase noise just to avoid discomfort. Watch what happens. Watch how he responds or doesn't. Watch how you feel without him constantly there. Because silence, that's where masks fall off. And remember this, the right connection doesn't collapse in silence. It either grows stronger or it shows you exactly why it needed to end. Now the question is, when the silence hits, are you reacting or are you learning from it?